Do you see us as coming out of the COVID phase, or are we still dealing with so many of the problems of the past 2 years still, plus lingering problems from the Ukraine war and those effects on supply chains themselves?
I think from the last session, the speakers, most of them noted that most of the countries in the region are in the process of economic recovery. But of course, the external environment doesn't offer cause for optimism. I don't have to list out all of them. But I think, but I see it this way, that this crisis and recovery really is an opportunity for each of the ASEAN countries to do what we haven't done for a long time, which is economic restructuring. And so when I talk about recovery, I think we have to think long term. And for Thailand, of course, we face this problem of the middle income trap. We've been stuck for a decade. And so the challenge is to restructure our economy to make it more competitive, in line with the global economy and trends, and also to move ourselves up the global value chain. And this is what we are doing in the place where I'm working, which is the Eastern Economic Corridor. It's the 3 provinces to the east of Bangkok, immediate east of Bangkok. And here, of course, we're going towards more advanced technology. Second, we're developing infrastructure, airports, high-speed train, expanding our ports and our logistics, and also investing a lot in what we haven't done before, which is human capital, and going towards a digital economy, because these days, everything is about digitalization. And the big challenge also is how to seize this opportunity of this transition to do more in terms of sustainability. I think, it offers both, it's a challenge and opportunities for new investment. And I think these days, investors, when they look at places to invest, they think about, what kind of environment does that country offer in terms of sustainability, green economy. So these things that we are doing in terms of our efforts to move up the value chain. But I think, I've been a diplomat most of my life. I'm not an economist. I've never been in business, but I am a believer in the region. I am a believer in ASEAN. And of course, ASEAN is facing tremendous challenges these days to what we call our centrality. But I think that there's a lot of potential in the region. And if you look at it in terms of the facts and figures, I think inter-ASEAN trade has increased. Intra-ASEAN investment has increased. And also, we have the RCEP, which may not be so much in terms of trade and free trade, but I think it's going to help in terms of enhancing the investment flows in the region, and especially the harmonization of the rules of origin. And so I think we will see, and I hope that with this process of integration that we can try to push forward more diversification and regionalization of the supply chain. But to be able to seize that opportunity, it's up to all of us to position ourselves to seize the opportunities that are coming with the diversification of supply chain and the risks that we face externally. So I hope that it's not just each country, but also the region working together.
Certainly, and you mentioned digital a few times. That is something that we do want to get a little bit more into. But first, Deb, Lai Yee, what do you see when you're looking at the supply chain world that we're in now?
Well, I like the ambassador's comments, and I think certainly there's a lot of opportunity in ASEAN, but I would really love to see the region seize this opportunity and do something with it. You know, we've had decades of integration in ASEAN. There are so many plans, so many activities, so many work plans, so many pilot projects, and all, I mean, I could go on, and most of them don't get implemented. So we don't need new thought, really. We have ample thought. We need to actually implement stuff in ASEAN. You know, we have just as an example, we have at least 7 different ASEAN highway initiatives, like to link up the countries of ASEAN by road, and as far as I know, you still can't drive across ASEAN. So like, what are we doing? Why would we make us an 8th version of this plan? We have 7 of them. Like, just do one and get it done and then move on to something else. So it would be great if ASEAN would seize the opportunity caused by this crisis to actually implement something. I think that would be awesome, because the disruption that we've had is intense. It's significant. It's particularly hit ASEAN hard, as many of you, of course, know, because of the reliance on travel and tourism, which is shattered. The problems we've had with mobility, the inconsistent responses that we've had, the reliance of this region on places where COVID is still happening, well, at least where we still pretend that it's happening. We don't seem to be pretending that it's happening here, which is great personally, but you know, other places that are worried about COVID. So I think we're not out of the woods yet for ASEAN recovery and supply chains, but it would be awesome if these governments in this region, together with their dialogue partners, and I think you mentioned the importance of ASEAN with other kinds of groups, entities, agencies, NGOs, international organizations, businesses, business organizations. I mean, the infrastructure is amazing to try to support ASEAN through disruption, but I think it's now time to turn to actually implementing some stuff. Let's get it done, let's move on, you know, so that would be awesome if we could actually deliver that. And my last sort of point before I turn it over to the rest of my panel, you know, I think we've had some interesting initiatives this year out of Cambodia as ASEAN chair. Cambodia is, I think, a bit more ambitious than people might imagine, given its developmental status. They've been trying very hard to actually deliver things, including in the digital space. But, you know, ASEAN loves shiny stuff. So they like the next most exciting something or other. And, you know, the instinct to just turn and go to something else new and exciting is tough. It's tough for Cambodia. It's tough for next year. Indonesia chair will be tough as well. So if we could keep, especially from the business community, my plea, I'm assuming most of you are business, plea from the business community is to please make sure that you are communicating as regularly as possible with ASEAN officials to say, make it happen. That's what matters to us. Make whatever you promised actually happen. And that would make a big difference to us in our business activities every day, and in the way in which our supply chains are actually resilient, and then in which we could move up the value chain. So let me just stop there. Thanks.
Don't get distracted by the shiny stuff.
No shiny stuff.
I think echoing to what Deborah mentioned, I think the pandemic has certainly pushed us forward to have maybe clearer perspective of why we need to move up the chain and what are some of the supply chain executives are looking for, right? In one of the study that IBM did, they are saying that with this pandemic and many of the unseen geopolitical situations, it's actually led people to think that, you know, we're not only going to be just reliable, right? The just-in-time doctrine might not be as relevant now. How do we become, we've heard things on being resilient. Now, what does being resilient means, right? I think there are a lot of asks to say that, can supply chain be more transparent, be more visible? Can they allow, you know, embracing the data and insights that we have across the very disparate supply chain functions? Can we look across that to see whether we can come up with different risk models, alternate supplier chains, simulations? I think all of that, if we can pull that together and get that done, I think we have a lot that we can achieve in ASEAN. And I think with that, I'm going to say technology is going to play a big part. I'm sure, Michelle, we've talked about that as we discussed as well. I truly believe that this is the time where we need to embrace technology in supply chain in order to achieve what we've been saying, and what Deborah says, let's get going and get it done.
Yeah, well, certainly I want to hone in on the digitalization aspect of this. You know, to borrow another COVID era cliche, we're all emerging stronger, right? Or at least hoping to. And digital has been such a big message out of so many ASEAN economies, if not all of them. First, I do want to bring up the audience participation polling question. if we could. It's slightly off topic, but I do want to get that in so then we can talk about that and then move into digitalization. But one thing that we've heard a lot in the news, at least in the trade world, is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Of course, we had a meeting of 14 delegations in Los Angeles last week. The polling question, if we can bring it up, is about how the audience feels about what benefit, if or lack of benefit, there might be to this framework. So if you could select one of the three options, and then we'll tackle that in a second. But in the meantime, let me pose to the panelists on digitalization, if we can kind of move in two directions at once. How would you grade governments and business in ASEAN on, as you say, Deb, maybe there's a lot of talk and less walk right now, but on digital initiatives coming out of the pandemic, how are we doing? Where are we in getting some of that stuff done versus just talking about emerging stronger and what a great idea it would be to transform everything into the tech world?
I think it's a mixed picture. So we have some governments that have done a really good job, I think, of being supportive of the move to digital, and particularly where you need to focus in ASEAN is on the smaller businesses. So getting your SMEs to go digital is an area that I think a lot of governments have done a good job of investing in. So as an example, here in Singapore, they've moved tens of thousands of hawkers at the hawker centers into the digital economy by trying to cajole them to please give up cash and accept digital payments or to work with digital delivery companies for food. I think that's been very impressive, and you see stories like that across the region. I think the other thing that gives me optimism in the digital space is that ASEAN governments have actually done a really good job, in my view, of thinking about what does a digital framework look like that could be connected between all of them. So they signed a digital economy, they call it an e-commerce agreement in 2018, which is, yay. And then they have a work plan attached to this, which we spent a year actually developing the work plan. So I can tell you it's an awesome document. And the best part about actually developing that work plan was the interaction with ASEAN members. So we had incredible, which is the thing that gives me optimism, incredible participation from all 10 ASEAN countries. At the domestic level, they were bringing in not just their trade ministries, but across their government, their digital economy ministries, even agriculture was there, customs, trade facilities, so a huge intergovernmental effort to figure out what is it that we agreed to do, how can we do that domestically, and then within all of ASEAN's very complicated structure, all kinds of sectoral bodies also engaged. So we had crazy involvement from all these committees that work across ASEAN, and at the end of it, made a work plan that everybody agreed to, which is, I think, amazing, right? That doesn't happen very often in ASEAN. All of that is great, but as so often in ASEAN, we haven't implemented it. So let's hope that there are some projects, and there are some that are getting picked up. And one of the things that's in there, in case you're interested in digital and you want to take my advice and talk to government, in 2023, which is already next year, we have a review of that work plan. So you could, if you want, ask your local government official, where are we on the implementation and the review of that work plan of the digital economy? And then we could actually implement some stuff that would make a difference. So there are ways that that business especially can push ASEAN to deliver more, because I think the enthusiasm is there. It's just that you have 1,000 priorities, and then which one do you focus on is difficult. But I do think ASEAN at the moment is putting digital, not just because it's a shiny thing, but because it actually matters. And I think that's something that's fantastic that should be seized upon.
So ahead of implementation of a lot of these big initiatives, Lai Yee, what's your view from your perch at IBM? Are businesses moving much faster?
Yes, I think, while we would like governments to play a bigger part in pushing these big projects, I think what's important is businesses need to really take charge and move forward with some of these projects to show the quick wins, right? And two key areas that we're seeing a lot, in fact, in our survey, more than 40% are already looking at AI, deep tech AI data going on cloud to implement cognitive control towers, right? Really a connected hub looking at data that integrates, as I've mentioned earlier, the disparate supply chains so that it can give them better information, right? Help them with risk modeling to make decisions or to ensure they do not over or underreact on any economic situation. The other key projects that we are also seeing, in fact, more than 20% of supply chain executives are talking about a digital twins, right? Digital twin where you can simulate. So the control towers give you the information to take decisions, to make better decisions. But now they're talking about digital twins, right? To see how can I simulate? And I think that's absolutely critical because we don't know what the next pandemic, economic situation, what prices are going to be. I think the earlier panel talked about perhaps a misjudgment on oil prices or inflation and all. How do we then ensure that we've got the tools and the technology to help us when such situations occur? Because I don't think we can predict perfectly, but when it occurs, how can then be able to react correctly, minimize misinformation and minimize the impact, negative impact. I don't think we can, we will get away from it, but how do we minimize it? I think it's where I'm hoping the businesses will take charge. And I think with that, encourage us at the nation level, encourage SMEs, and then of course, encouraging governments to come in and facilitate an ecosystem of platforms where we can help ASEAN as a whole.
Well, you mentioned cloud somewhere in there, and I wanted to specifically direct that to Ambassador, to you. Your deputy PM recently mentioned that big companies are looking to invest in cloud computing in Thailand, specifically in areas like the Eastern Economic Corridor. Can you tell me, how is that going? What is your pitch to these investors, and what is the ambition right now? I mean, what kinds of investors and what kind of volumes are you seeing bringing in?
Well, of course, we realize the importance of the digital economy. And for me, it's whether we're going to be successful or not is we need partnership between the government and the private sector. And this has always been our approach as far as the EEC is concerned, especially in the development of infrastructure, the airport, and the high-speed train, for instance. And it's the same with the digital economy. And so, our task, we call ourselves a sandbox. Our task is to really provide the right regulations, the right regulatory framework, so that the private sector will have incentives to invest in cloud computing in Thailand. And I think we are offering a good package. But in the EEC, if I could just talk a little bit about it, our approach is not just providing blanket incentives. Our approach is to look at the individual companies and to negotiate and to discuss and have what we call customized incentives. And so each company probably have different sets of requirements. But of course, it has to be to the mutual interests of both sides. But on cloud computing, yes, indeed, we're doing a lot, and we're talking with AWS, Google, and Control S, and another company whose name I forgot. But anyway, well, we are trying to, and we've set up what we call the digital hub. Now, in the EEC, we have, of course, introduced the 5G network, but we're going beyond that, and we have a digital hub, and we're trying to promote R&D in the digital economy and to create the right regulatory environment and also the place that you can invest in the digital services.
So if you build it, they will come, to borrow a movie quote.
Well, we have to provide the framework, the place, and the environment.
Okay. Let's bring up the polling results. Let me see if we can check out how people voted. Okay, and I should have my glasses on, but it looks like the final option is an empty framework with ASEAN being used as a pawn in the counter-China US strategy. So a fairly pessimistic view from the audience about the use of IPEF for ASEAN. Does that match? Does anybody want to comment on the result there? Does it surprise you? Do you agree, disagree?
Well, could I?
Please.
Because, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we didn't have Indo-Pacific. We had Asia-Pacific. So Indo-Pacific is, in a way, a geostrategic construct. which I think is good because it reflects the rise of India, the engagement of India. But I'm a little bit concerned now that, you know, the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy has placed emphasis on containing China, deterring China. But it doesn't mean that, you know, we want to see, you know, a balance of power in the region. We want to see the United States engage. We have to live with China, of course. China is a major power in the region. But what we want, hopefully, at a certain stage, both countries working together to meet the needs of the region. Because right now, it's a competition between the two major powers, but we don't really want to be caught in this geopolitical contestation, but it's unavoidable. But the economic agenda that the United States is pushing under the framework, the Indo-Pacific economic, is good. It's good, but I hope that, you know, the US would add more substance to it and, you know, we want to see more trade, we want to see more development cooperation.
Market access.
Yeah, so these are issues that we hope that, well, first, this initiative is good. It's a positive agenda being pursued by the United States in the context of Indo-Pacific. And, but I hope that they would flesh out this initiative with more substance and also listen to the needs of countries in the region.
Any thoughts on glass half full, glass half empty here on IPEF?
Well, I would just note that one of the pillars in IPEF is on supply chains. And the ministers who just met said that they're all enthusiastic about resilient, open, and inclusive supply chains. So they're going to work towards that, which, I mean, I suppose that's great. But again, for me, I don't know, has anyone ever asked for not resilient, like weak, ineffective, not integrated supply chains? I don't think anyone ever really said that. So I'm assuming that this is the direction we all agree we need to go, but then, as always, what does that mean about how we're going to get there? And so the real challenge on IPEF, the Pacific Economic Framework, is how do you take those very broad, very enthusiastic kinds of, you know, motherhood and apple pie statements and translate them down into, especially for business, sort of actionable things that make a difference to your jobs between now and, let's say, you know, whatever, 5 years from now or less. I mean, obviously you would prefer next quarter. That is not going to happen. So sometime in the, you know, relatively near term, before we are all dead, can we please get some kind of results from IPEF? And maybe we will. You know, I think that it's a framework that allows you to do a lot of different things with it. And so, you know, I suppose if we're all pushing in the same general direction and we all agree on the same general goals, maybe that's how you get a more interesting outcome from this. So I think I think the glass is in the middle, and then you make of it what you want to do with that. It could be fantastic. It could be a complete waste of time. And it depends in a way on all of us and our enthusiasm in promoting or pushing these kinds of ideas, whether we get something useful or we get just a lot of people flying around and talking.
Well, we're running up against time, but I do want to ask one final quick question, if we can make it quick. And this, Ambassador, I was thinking about when you mentioned customized incentives. It kind of reminded me of the announcements that we've heard both out of Singapore and Thailand and others across the world recently about trying to attract global talent, but very specifically, very targeted, finding in certain sectors, you know. And I wanted to ask, Lai Yee, you've talked about talents before and the importance of talent in, you know, kind of marketing for Southeast Asia economies. I mean, where are you seeing those opportunities right now? How would you grade ASEAN on doing that? And is this an exciting time where we might see more of that to come?
Yeah, I think I was going to also add on to what Deborah mentioned about, you know, it's just a framework, coming back to the framework, and we need to get something, you know, going. So I think what's really important is for businesses to, and leaders, right? All of us are business leaders here, to really adopt a different mindset. I think it starts from that. We need to have a mindset, and we need to have to adopt a more agile way of doing. I know agile is you know, widely overused. You know, what does it mean? You know, do you get a scrum master and all? But it's not. I really believe it is about a mindset change, right? It is about breaking down a big framework or a big problem into smaller chunks and really get to that quick momentum of implementing something, getting something done. I think that's absolutely critical, right? So the agile way of doing, the mindset change, then comes the talent, because what we've been talking about is going to be a lot of digitalization. I think in 5 years' time, I think similar to in the finance sector or in the technology sector, people talk about lack of skills in the deep tech. I think we're going to have the same challenge here in ASEAN if we don't do something today. And I know that the governments have put in a lot of incentives and help in that area. I think it is time for all of us to embrace a different mindset, to have a more agile way of doing, to embrace the talent. I think we have a lot of potential here. We've got a lot of support. It's really important for all of us to work together as an ASEAN to embrace that.
I like agility. It seems to be a good watchword to focus on in the months ahead. Well, thank you so much to all of you. Unfortunately, we're seeing the flashing red, so we could continue this for hours, but hopefully we can continue the conversation after this panel ends. Thank you so much.